Okay, thank you. I'm delighted. I'm Sharon Achenstein. I'm on the Lifelong Learning Committee at Beth Am Synagogue, which is led ably by Barry and Melissa. It's my delight to welcome to Beth Am our scholar in residence, Rabbi Jane Kanarek, professor of rabbinics and dean of the Hebrew College Rabbinical School. As those of us saw last night, even a jet-lagged Rabbi Kanarek is clearly a passionate scholar of Talmud. With a motto, teaching is an inquiry into learning, and with a Ph.D. from the University of Chicago and rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary, she's the author of scholarly books on Talmud and books on pedagogy. Her first book, Biblical Narrative and the Formation of Rabbinic Law, from Cambridge in 2014, is a brilliant exploration of the relationship between the stories of the Bible and rabbinic law. The Talmud reads the Bible. It reads biblical narrative as law. But how does that happen? How do you turn stories, her examples are from the book of Genesis, that are not really about law, into law? What are the internal textual motivations, the external cultural influences? How does that transformation also do the work of constructing rabbinic authority? What is the relationship between law and narrative? These may be scholarly questions, but as we saw last night, they also lay claim to a pedagogic method, rousing an audience to ask ever more questions. Her book, which has a wonderful title, Learning to Read Talmud, What It Looks Like and How It Happens, which is a co-edited volume with Marjorie Lehman, is a study of how teachers in both religious and secular institutions in the classrooms and how students, how they teach and how students learn. We find that good reading means good and more questions. Confronting even difficult questions builds a long-term relationship with and deepens a reverence for the text. Rabbi Kanarek insists that it's not only with the mind, but with the heart that learning takes place. Another project used interviews with 32 rabbinical students from 5 different rabbinical colleges to ask about their relationship with Talmud study. The result is brilliantly titled, Throwing the Talmud Across the Room, Emotions and the Cultivation of Subjectivity in Talmud Study. And that's from the Journal of Jewish Education. There, Rabbi Kanarek explored how emotions point readers towards the objects of study, but also how they can repel readers from those objects, even leading to alienation from them. Reading, she shows, makes a claim on life. Her almost published book next month, December, is titled Beyond Brutality, Reclaiming Female Presence in Tractate Sotah, from Brandeis University Press, available on Amazon, almost. And it takes up the disturbing ritual designed to expose and humiliate women accused of adultery. Some of its chapter titles seem to jump out of today's news. Failures of Care, From War to Women. I can't wait to read it. When my grandfather died in 1997, he left me his books. He was an armchair scholar of Jewish learning, history, archaeology, and biblical study. Born in America in 1900 to immigrant Orthodox Jewish parents, he was deeply Jewish in outlook, though not practicing in the synagogue. He read constantly. He died with a book in his hand and imbued to me a spirit of study, inquiry, and learning. It is true limud that brings us all together here today, and that is this pillar of Beth Am we're celebrating with our scholar in residence. In his collection, there were some tomes that had come from the old country, and there were volumes of Talmud, though not the Tractate Sotah. I'm eager to deepen my engagement with these traditions as they're alive and vibrantly being reconsidered, learning indeed. Please welcome Rabbi Jane Kanarek.
Thank you so much for that introduction as well, and for the research that went into it. I very much appreciate your generosity. I just want to say one word of correction, which is just that I'm not the dean of the rabbinical school. I'm the dean of faculty and work very, very close. Don't worry, people make the mistake all the time. I work very, very closely with the dean of the rabbinical school, helping to run the rabbinical school. So it's not totally inaccurate, but I want to really give full credit to my colleague, my wonderful colleague, Rabbi Danielle Klein, who is the dean of the rabbinical school. No problem. The rest was amazing. So last night we looked at Talmud through feminist eyes. Tonight, not now, we're actually going to be touching on exactly what you spoke about in your introduction, which is looking at narratives from the book of Genesis and how they become law, and the way in which laws carry narrative meaning and weight. And of course, we're going to ask that so what question tonight about that area. What we are going to be doing today, though, really grows out of a passage in the Talmud that I find particularly powerful. The Talmud talks about the phrase that we say during the Torah service, V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe. This is the Torah that Moshe put before us. And there is one word that the rabbis emphasize in this phrase, and that word is sam, put, spelled samech mem. And what they do is turn that, sin, I did it the wrong way around, sin mem. And what they do is turn that sin into a samech. So the word put becomes the word either elixir or poison, medicine or poison. It's the same words, samech mem, means in Hebrew both poison or elixir. And so what the rabbis say is that the Torah can either be sam hachayim, the elixir of life, or sam hamavet, the elixir of death. V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, what did Moshe put before us? A Torah that could be life-giving, or a Torah that could actually be the opposite and be a Torah of tragedy and death. The leap that I make from that is that the Torah is not inevitably one thing. The Torah is not inevitably a life-giving document. What does that mean for us? That means it is our job as Jews to choose to make the Torah sam hachayim, to choose to turn the Torah into an elixir of life, because it is not inevitably going to be that. That is our job. So, V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, Moshe put this Torah before us, and it is our job to make sure that it is a life-giving and sustaining holy document, holy Torah. That leads me to another really deep commitment of mine. The Torah in its widest sense, and by that I mean Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah. By that I mean the Talmud. By that I mean our midrashic tradition. By that I mean what we produce and call Torah. It is holy. It is deeply holy. And it is a transcendent text that is supposed to actually span the ages and not be limited to one time period. But the Torah is also a historical document. It was also written, and now I'm saying the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and let's put the Talmud in there. It was also written in a particular time. And now I'm going to shift to the Talmud. In the case of the Talmud, that's probably 1,500 years ago now. So if the Talmud were to match our moral sense, I would be shocked. I don't expect it to match what I, Jane, stand here and say, in all aspects, meet me and match my morality. But because it is holy, at the same time, I expect that it should. So what do I do with this paradox of a text, the Talmud, that is holy to me, that does not always match my morality, but nevertheless, I demand that it inform how I live. I demand that it actually be Sam HaChaim, a life-giving source, and I demand that it help me learn how to build a just neighborhood, family, society world. What do I do with that paradox? What we're going to be studying together today is going to take us into Tractate Sotah of the Babylonian Talmud and the Sotah ritual, places that I call the rabbis not quite at their worst, but in some ways at their worst, and also at their best. And that is going to be a way for us to enter into this question of what does it mean to wrestle with something that might contradict some of your deepest moral intuitions and impulses, and transform it, subvert it in a sense, and transform it into something that can actually meet us, be holy, and actually push us towards the creation of a more just and better world. I want to, with that, be really clear and say also that I'm not going to be prescriptive about what that just world looks like, but what I want to model for us and have us model together in this teaching is a sense of not giving up, not confronting something that we say, this is awful, and say, I'm going to retreat and I'm going to remove myself from dialogue. Instead, we're going to ask, how does one stay in dialogue? And how does one transform something that one might find to be profoundly disturbing without saying, oh no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, because we're not going to do that, but nevertheless subvert it and transform it. So I'm asking us to do together today the difficult project of holding what's ugly and holding what's beautiful at the same time. That's what we're going to do. The way in which I teach to signal to you is I do some frontal, but I'm also going to bring you into the discussion. We're going to be partners in this as well. Thank you again in the generous introduction for noting that one of the things I work on is emotions and the teaching of Talmud and emotions. So I want to also name that these texts may also produce some difficult emotions. If you want to throw these source sheets across the room at some point, I won't blame you. But hopefully you will also want to pick them up, even if you do have that impulse as we're learning together. So with that, what we're going to start with is a Agadah, so a rabbinic story from Tractate Sotah. And I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. After that, we're going to look at the biblical Sotah ritual pretty quickly. We're going to look at a little bit of the Mishnah, which is our earliest rabbinic document from around the year 200 of the Common Era, what it does with that biblical Sotah ritual. We're going to circle back to this passage from Bavli Sotah, and then we're going to see how it also gets transformed a little bit later in a midrash that's a little bit later called the Tanchuma. So I'm going to, with no further ado, jump into reading this midrash, which is found on page 1. If you're interested in seeing the Hebrew, usually I like to put things in 2 columns, but that wasn't going to work here. All of the texts are also available in the original Hebrew and Aramaic at the back, starting on page 6. Okay, that's why this source packet is so long, because I wanted you to have the original as well. Okay, expounded Rav Avira. For the reward of the righteous women who were in that generation was Israel redeemed from Egypt. At the time when they went to draw water, the Holy Blessed One prepared for them small fish in their jars, and they drew out half water and half fish. And they came and placed 2 pots, one for hot water and one for fish. And these women brought them to their husbands in the field, and washed their husbands, and anointed them with oil, and fed them, and gave them to drink, and had sexual intercourse with them between the mounds in the field. As it is said, even for those of you who lie among the sheepfolds, there are wings of a dove sheathed in silver, its pinions in fine gold. Now on to D. For the reward of you who lie among the sheepfolds, Israel merited the spoil of Egypt when they went out from Egypt. As it is said, there are wings of a dove sheathed in silver, its pinions in fine gold. And when these women became pregnant, they went to their houses. When the time of their giving birth arrived, they went and gave birth in the field under the apple tree. As it is said, under the apple tree I roused you. It was there your mother conceived you. There she who bore you conceived you. And the Holy Blessed One sent from heaven one who cleansed and smoothed them like a midwife who smooths a newborn. As it is said, as for your birth, when you were born and your navel cord was not cut, and you were not bathed in water to smooth you, you were not rubbed with salt, nor were you swaddled. And he, God, would gather for them 2 cakes, one of oil and one of honey. As it is said, he set him atop the highlands to feast on the yield of the earth. He fed him honey from the crag and oil from the flinty rock. Next page. And when Egypt recognized these women, they came to kill them. And a miracle was done for them, and they were swallowed by the earth. And they brought oxen and plowed over their backs. As it is said, plowmen plowed across my back. They made long furrows. After they left, they broke through and came forth like the grass of the field. As it is said, I let you grow like the plants of the field. And you continued to grow up until you attained to womanhood, until your breasts became firm and your hair sprouted. You were still naked and bare. And when they had grown, they came in flocks to their houses, as it is written, and you continued to grow up until you attained to womanhood. Do not read ba'adei adayim, but rather be'edrei adarim. I'll come back to that. And when the Holy Blessed One was revealed at the sea, they recognized God first, as it is written, this is my God, and I will glorify him. Ze'eli v'anvehu. We're going to go back, and we are going to just retell this just as a narrative without extra commentary to make sure that we're all on the same page of what's happening in this tale. And then we are going to work through it a little bit more closely. So, no, these are not meant to be trick questions. I'm just signaling to you, I'm not trying to trick you if I ask you. Expounded Rav Avira, this is a fancy way of Rav Avira said, and I'm going to start to interpret the Torah. That's Rav Avira, not me. So Rav Avira, what does he say about the righteous women? What do they get? Or what does Israel get? Great. They get redemption as a reward for the righteous women. So Israel is brought out from Egypt as a reward for something that these righteous women did. And so with B, we start the tale of what exactly did these righteous women do. So what's the first thing they do? Right. They go and they draw water. And what does God do? Great. Puts fish in the jars, so when they're drawing it out, they get half water and half fish. Presumably, they're going to the Nile to draw the water, and then they come and they place 2 pots on a fire, one for hot water and one for fish. So they're warming up these pots of water, and the husbands are presumably doing slave labor out in the fields. They're all slaves to Pharaoh, and what do these women do? Great. They bring the water and the fish down to the field, and they bathe their husbands, and they anoint them with oil, and they feed them, and they give them to drink. And then after they've fed them, and after they've cleaned them up, they have sex with their husbands. And we have a proof text from Psalms. Something that happens with Psalms in midrash a lot is Tehillim, Psalms that actually have no reference at all to any historical event, become references to historical events. So here we have a verse, even for those of you who lie among the sheepfolds, their wings of a dove sheathed in silver. So the women and their husbands are lying among these sheepfolds. That's the exegetical link. This verse from Psalms is now read as describing a particular event that led up to the Exodus from Egypt. And that is the women washing, anointing, and having sex with their husbands. Now, let's just fill in one thing there. Why is that also remarkable? Presumably, what has already happened at this point? What has Pharaoh decreed? The firstborn sons are going to be thrown into the Nile. So this is quite a risk that these women are taking. And then we have a parenthetical comment in D. When Israel leaves Egypt, they take all of these vessels that belong to their neighbors. So that's that parenthetical comment here. And now we're going to skip to E. What happens to these women after having sex? They become pregnant. And then they go to their houses. So let's just also note the miraculous nature of the pregnancy, that all of these women, they have sex and it's all at the right time of the month, and they all become pregnant, and they go to their houses. And then it's time to give birth, and where do they give birth? Right. They give the birth in the field under an apple tree. And there we have a verse from the Song of Songs, from Shir HaShirim, as support for that. Again, Shir HaShirim is not, the Song of Songs is not about the Exodus from Egypt at all. But the rabbis take this verse and have it tell a story about what happened in the Exodus from Egypt. And here that verse is, under the apple tree I roused you. It was there your mother conceived you. There she who bore you conceived you. So not actually a far reach. It's a story about birth under an apple tree and conception under an apple tree.
Well, I've seen pictures of Egypt with palm trees. I've never seen a picture of an apple tree in Egypt,
Yes,
ever.
that is a great point. And I'm going to do more research on that. Thank you for noticing that. I actually don't know enough about Egypt, and what it's actually making me think is whether also tapuach, in fact, here is best translated as an apple. I don't know, but it's the imaginative realm that this midrash goes into. So what you just pointed out is a mismatch, which happens a lot. And wait, I will say one more thing because I want to go through the whole midrash before we get to more questions, is just when I see a mismatch like that, I tend to say why. Like, why are they creating that? Because they probably knew that as well. So what's at stake here? What are they trying to drive home to us? Next verse. And then what does God do, probably for the mothers who, after they give birth, what does God act as? As a midwife. So either God is sending a representative of God's, and then God is also acting as a midwife. There's some actual manuscript versions of this text that have God's self, doing the whole midwife act, not just sending someone from heaven. So God comes and acts as a midwife, smoothing these newborn babies and taking care of them. And then what else does God do? I think in H, it's actually for the mothers. Gathers food, right? Cakes and oil, and he feeds these mothers who have just given birth. And then Egypt recognizes these women who have given birth. And what is God? The Egyptians come to kill them, and the women and their babies are miraculously swallowed by the earth. And then that earth is plowed over. The image that I have there is the plow is actually covering up any clue that these women and their children are under the earth. And then the Egyptians go away, and the women and their children break through the earth again and come up to the surface. And then when they had grown, when these children grow up, they return to their houses. And then we conclude with this coda after the Exodus. So the scene here is the scene of the song at the sea. Israel has just crossed the sea's split. They're singing Az Yashir Moshe, and there's Ze Eli V'Anvehu. They're singing that whole song of thanks for having been saved. And according to the end of this, these children who were birthed in the field are the first ones to recognize God. According to this, God appears at the sea. And this is a little trick. Ze Eli v'anvehu. This is my Lord, and I will glorify him. Rabbinic interpretation often reads the word ze, this. The fancy tech word is deiktik, meaning pointing something out. So they read the children as singing ze. This is my God that I'm pointing to. I've seen God before. Where did I see God? When I was born in the field. And now I'm going to recognize you, God, now that you've liberated me. So that's the story. I want to pause before going any further and ask you, I'm going to get more specific, but in the first moment, I want to ask you, what do you notice in this story that you find intriguing or interesting? What's with fish? Great. Why are fish here? And just want to say, we do have 2 microphones here, so I will either repeat or you can take a microphone and use it. We'll see, but I want to make sure everyone can hear what's being said. Great. Are these children actually all girls that are born? Are these children all girls? Because it says you attain to womanhood. And what does that mean if they're all girls?
What are they doing underground?
What are they doing underground? And how do they survive underground? This is almost reminds me of the story of Persephone as well, of going underground and surviving underground, of this other world, protective world underground.
You mentioned last night about the relationship between women and land, and it didn't seem to fit. But here there's this really strong relationship between women and the earth. So I'd love to explore that.
Yeah, there's a really strong relationship here between women and the earth, and what's happening here with the earth being protective deeply.
The amount of time that's represented in this story, from the time that they're born till the time that they have grown.
Right. What's the time span in this story? Is it long? Is it short? What's happening with the sense of time?
Well, why does it say you were not rubbed with salt, nor were you swaddled?
Great. Why does it say that? You were not rubbed with salt, and you were not swaddled. What's going on here with these acts of care after childbirth?
From a practical point of view, why did they have to go out into the fields? Why didn't the husbands come home? I think the obvious link is to the verses where the quota for how much work they do has to be taken into account.
Great. So there are a couple things. Why do the women go to the fields? Why don't the men go actually home?
Right.
Is that connected with the quota of the work labor of what the husbands have to produce each day?
Right.
And I just want to emphasize again that question of, well, why are the women going out of the home to the fields and the men not coming?
I was going to say that this is really all an allegory. This isn't really real. What's going on isn't real. For us to explain in a Peshat sort of way. I think it refers to procreation, creation, the fields where the men are working, but the women are doing pretty much everything else. And they're taking a fundamental responsibility for the continuation of the people, just like the people that plant and reap are taking responsibility for the procreation of people through nutrition. So it's that story that women fill in all the gaps that men aren't doing.
Great. So one could read this as a story of women filling in all these gaps of the men not doing it. One could read it as an allegory. I will say that I don't actually think the Talmud sees this as an allegory. Whether it actually happened or not, I don't know. But I don't think that the Talmud is actually presenting this as an allegory, because they are actually very concrete about saying, you, Israel, were freed from Egypt because of this story that I'm about to tell you.
It struck me that the men are presented as very passive.
The men are presented as passive here, very possibly. The women are going to them, they're feeding them, they're washing them. They're going to where they are, in the green headband. Right, yeah.
There's a lot of really intimate acts that are happening very publicly.
There are a lot of intimate acts happening publicly. Yes. Washing, anointing with oil, feeding, sexual intercourse, childbirth, washing the babies. It's very, very intimate acts of care that perhaps one wouldn't even expect to see in the Talmud done.
So at the very beginning, I don't know the context that preceded it, but it says righteous women who were in that generation. Which generation? So it was just one specific cohort of women, as opposed to women throughout the course of the slavery.
Yeah. Yes, it's that. I'll answer that. It's in this particular generation that it's done. This story is actually part of a much longer reading that extends over a few pages in this tractate of the Talmud that explicates Exodus chapter 2, so the story of the Exodus from Egypt. The whole narrative is quite amazing.
Well, the story is being told by the rabbis, who have no experience of what they're talking about. It's like Catholic priests talking about it. And it's not their world. It's the women's experiences, the women's world, and it's stories being told by people who really aren't eligible to be telling the story.
One way of looking this is that it's being told by the rabbis who are not part of this women's world, and so they're telling a story they have no part to tell. Here's the part I want to push back at a little bit. First of all, two things that I want to say. In a sense, one could say that about not the whole Talmud, but a big chunk of it, because a lot of the Talmud is actually about the rabbis constructing an image of something that happened a long time ago. So there are all these sections about temple sacrifices, entire tractates about temple sacrifices, where rabbis didn't do them at all. So one can also see this as not at all unusual, but in an oral culture, there are going to be stories that are passed down. And so part of what I actually imagine is this is one of the stories that is told in that culture. And that oral culture is passed on by everyone. And I want to also just remind us here that in this story, there are men, children, and women. So in essence, there's the whole society in this one story. One more comment, and then we're going to go on.
I am a little confused on what is constituting such righteousness that Israel should be redeemed from Egypt. It seems like they're very normal women that could have existed in any generation during slavery in Egypt. So what are they doing that's actually special?
Fantastic question. We're going to come back to that, but I want to zero in on something that you said, which is they're normal women and doing what a woman could do in any generation. So let's hold on to that and consider maybe that is in fact righteousness. Okay? Maybe they're doing something else too, though. So let's hold that question, and it's a wonderful transition to the next section. As I said, this is found in Tractate Sotah of the Babylonian Talmud. What we are going to do now, if you turn to page 2, is do a really, really quick reading of the Sotah ritual. So the Sotah ritual is a ritual, as you will see in the Bible, that a husband can force his wife to go through when he suspects her of having had sexual intercourse with another man. And his jealousy alone can be enough for him to initiate the ritual. I'm going to give you a heads up. This is bad. When we go to the Mishnah, it's going to get worse. But as I read this, what I want you to look for is certain specific things. I want you to be thinking about, can the woman be guilty or innocent? There are only 3 things I want you to really notice as we're reading this. Can the woman be guilty or innocent? Where does the ritual happen? And who are the actors in this ritual? So who are the participants? Where does it happen? Guilt or innocence? Okay, Numbers chapter 5. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, if any man's wife has gone astray and broken faith with him, in that a man has had carnal relations with her unbeknown to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she has defiled herself without being forced, and there is no witness against her, but a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he is wrought up about the wife who has defiled herself, or if a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he is wrought up about his wife, although she has not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest. And he shall bring as an offering for 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. No oil shall be poured upon it, and no frankincense shall be laid on it, for it is a meal offering of jealousy, a meal offering of remembrance which recalls wrongdoing. The priest shall bring her forward and have her stand before the Lord. The priest shall take sacred water in an earthen vessel, and, taking some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall put it into the water. After he has made the woman stand before the Lord, the priest shall bear the woman's head and place upon her hands the meal offering of remembrance, which is a meal offering of jealousy. And in the priest's hand shall be the water of bitterness that induces the spell. The priest shall adjure the woman, make her take an oath, saying to her, if no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray in defilement while married to your husband, be immune to harm from this water of bitterness that induces the spell. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband and have defiled yourself, if a man other than your husband has had carnal relations with you, here the priest shall administer the curse of adjuration to the woman, as the priest goes on to say to the woman, may the Lord make you a curse and an imprecation among your people, as the Lord causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend. May this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag. Most scholars think that's either a reference to miscarriage or to uterine prolapse. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. The priest shall put these curses down in writing and rub it off into the water of bitterness. He is to make the woman drink the water of bitterness that induces the spell, so that the spell-inducing water may enter into her to bring on bitterness. Then the priest shall take from the woman's hand the meal offering of jealousy, elevate the meal offering before the Lord, and present it on the altar. The priest shall scoop out of the meal offering a token part of it, and turn it into smoke on the altar. Last, he shall make the woman drink the water. Once he has made her drink the water, if she has defiled herself by breaking faith with her husband, the spell-inducing water shall enter into her to bring on bitterness, so that her belly shall distend and her thigh shall sag, and the woman shall become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is pure, she shall be unharmed and able to retain seed. In other words, she'll be able to get pregnant. This is the ritual in cases of jealousy. When a woman goes astray while married to her husband and defiles herself, or when a fit of jealousy comes over a man and he is wrought up over his wife, the woman shall be made to stand before the Lord, and the priest shall carry out this ritual with her. The man shall be clear of guilt, but the woman shall suffer for her guilt. It's pretty bad. I want to really acknowledge that. And I want us, for the moment, to actually zero in first just on the outline of the ritual, but then on the three questions that I asked. So husband has a fit of jealousy, experiences this feeling of kina, and this feeling, this emotion of kina that he has means that he might choose to start this ritual. And now I'm actually going to stop for a moment explaining any further. So let's just start with, let's start with guilt or innocence. What does this passage lay out about the woman? Yeah.
Actually conceives and has a child, but because there's no time frame here, until that happens, she's kind of presumed guilty.
Okay, great. So you're taking a step further that innocence, a sign of her innocence would be that she can actually get pregnant. So you're picking up at an ambiguity in this passage itself of whether she's guilty or innocent. But the passage itself, which is great for when we get to the rabbinic material, but the passage itself holds out two possibilities, correct? The woman could be innocent or she could be guilty. And if she's guilty, she's going to drink the water and she's going to miscarry and have uterine prolapse. If she's innocent, presumably those things aren't going to happen and she has the ability to get pregnant. And what you're leaving open is the option that we might not know she's innocent until she actually gets pregnant. But the biblical ritual holds out both of these possibilities, guilt or innocence.
Duking it out with her jealous husband, and it's being made very clear from the beginning that the alleged charges may be a complete phantom of the husband's imagination, and that she's going to an arbitrary place where they're going to have a discovery process of evidence that's biblical evidence. It's not law and order evidence. So what happens is that this whole, if I put the 20th century spin on this whole process is something that is for the purpose of the husband and the marital harmony. If we assume that, in fact, none of these things are any more than mumbo jumbo, that it's an elaborate social process to clear the air one way or another, and maybe for the chance of harmony being restored to this couple.
Great. That is absolutely one way in which this biblical ritual has been understood, that part of the point of the ritual is actually to clear the woman. As you noted, she leaves the house here, and where she's actually going in the Bible is to the tabernacle, to the Mishkan. So in later Judaism, they would imagine that this ritual is carried out at the temple, in the Jerusalem temple. We don't actually know whether or not it was ever carried out, but the biblical ritual is happening in the desert tabernacle, in the Mishkan. So they're leaving the house, and who are the actors here that are involved in this ritual? The woman, the priest, and the husband. So there are three actors, and it's presumably also happening because it's happening at the altar inside the tabernacle. So it's a private ritual that is happening between husband, wife, and priest in one might call it the neutral space of the tabernacle. One thing that people have done with that is said, great, it could actually serve to restore harmony if she's cleared. I do, however, also want to note, nevertheless, the woman has to undergo this ritual. There is no parallel ritual to the husband saying, hey, you were jealous. You did this to your wife with no basis. She might have been terrified of going to the temple, having to drink this potion. I tend to think that in the biblical world, they didn't actually think this was mumbo jumbo. This is part of a larger culture of ordeals that happened in the ancient world, and that they actually believed that the water would be efficacious here. But nevertheless, whether you are correct of it restoring harmony or not, what I do want to note is that it's caused by jealousy, it's in another place, and the possibility of guilt or innocence is there for the woman as she undergoes this ritual. We could spend a lot of time on the biblical ritual and picking it apart. There are a lot of really, really interesting details in it. But for our purposes today, because I want to focus on the rabbinic material, this is as much as I want to do with the biblical ritual. We're going to now switch to Mishnah Sotah, which is our earliest classical rabbinic interpretation of this ritual. This is on page 4. I have taken selections from the first chapter of Mishnah Sotah here. I just want to warn you that it gets worse. So, biblical ritual in the temple, inside the temple, priest, husband, wife, private ritual, guilt or innocence is possible as verdicts. Let's now see what the Mishnah does with it. Okay. A man who warns his wife not to associate with a certain man. I'm going to read the whole thing and then back up. Rabbi Eliezer says he warns her on the testimony of 2 witnesses and makes her drink the bitter waters on the testimony of 1 witness or on his own testimony. Rabbi Joshua says he warns her on the testimony of 2 and makes her drink on the testimony of 2. I'm going to highlight a word here, which is warns. Mi she mikane is the Hebrew. So in the biblical text, the man feels an emotion called kina, which I've translated as jealousy. In the Mishnah, that emotion of kina, of jealousy, becomes a legal procedure that has 2 stages. One is a husband has to warn his wife not to be alone with another man, and then in front of witnesses, and then witnesses have to see her going into a private place and being alone with this particular man. It's called kinui and stira, warning and hiding. So what is in the biblical ritual a description of an emotion of jealousy, in the rabbinic ritual becomes a formal legal procedure for starting the Sotah process. That's what she's called. So here it's a man who warns his wife. Rabbi Eliezer says, he needs to warn her in front of 2 witnesses and then see her being alone on the testimony of 1 witness, or even he can just see her. And Rabbi Joshua says, no, he needs to warn her in front of two and needs to make her drink only when two men have seen her being alone with this other man. Okay, so that's the transformation from just emotion to a legal ritual. Mishnah number 4. They bring her up to the great court which is in Jerusalem. So they bring her up in front of the great court. This great court, I think, is the court that also oversees capital punishment. And the judges solemnly admonish her in the same way that they admonish witnesses in capital cases. And the judges, say to her, my daughter, much is done by wine, much is done by frivolity, much is done by youth, much is done by bad neighbors. For the sake of his great name, which is written in holiness, do it so that it may not be rubbed out on the water. And they say to her matters which neither she nor all the family of her father's house is worthy to hear. So note in the part of the ritual, it was described in the biblical ritual, there's a Sotah curse that's written that involves God's name. So if they are, and then that is erased with water and made into the potion. So here, if she goes through the ritual, God's name is going to be erased to make the potion, and they don't want that to happen. So what do the judges do? They basically here try and get her to confess. My daughter, you can drink too much, and that can lead you to go astray with another man. Frivolity, youth, bad neighbors, confess. Because if you confess to your guilt, then we're not going to keep doing this ritual. We're going to stop it. She actually can't go through the Sotah ritual. It doesn't apply to a woman who's raped. Great question. Yeah. She is never considered a Sotah.
Question, what is the punishment for adultery for a woman?
Depends on her. So this is really interesting. It's actually death, but a woman who is convicted of a Sotah, of where the potion makes her miscarry, we actually have no records or proclamations of her getting the death penalty. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. That this woman, even if the potion works, she still doesn't get the adultery penalty. Yeah. And then they say to her more matters which neither she nor all the family of her father's house is worthy to hear. Mishnah 5, if she says, I am defiled to you, in other words, I had sex, that's a fancy way of saying it, she gives him a receipt for her ketubah and goes out with a get. So if she confesses, she doesn't collect her ketubah money that she's owed, but she gives her husband a receipt saying, you gave me back the document, and then she leaves him. She gets a get, a divorce document. But if she says, I am pure, in other words, if she refuses to confess, they bring her up to the east gate of the temple, Nicanor's gate, where they give women suspected of adultery the water to drink, purify women after childbirth, and purify lepers. A priest seizes her clothing. If they are torn, then they are torn, and if they become unstitched, then they are unstitched, until he uncovers her breasts, and he undoes the braids of her hair. Rabbi Yehuda says, if her breasts are beautiful, he does not uncover them, and if her hair was beautiful, he does not undo it. Yeah, so this is also pretty bad, all laughter aside. This is what happens to a woman who says, I didn't do it, I'm pure. And I want you to note that none of this is in the biblical version. This is all a creation of the rabbis. This is all a creation of the later ritual of saying, actually, we're going to try and get her to confess. We're leaving very, very little room for her innocence. And if she says, I'm pure, they're going to degrade her deeply in order, again, to try and get her to confess. So it goes on in 6. If she was clothed in white, he clothes her in black. If she wore gold jewelry or necklaces, earrings, and finger rings, they remove them from her in order to make her repulsive. After that, the priest takes a rope made of twigs and binds it over her breasts. Whoever wishes to look upon her comes to look, with the exception of her male and female slaves, since she has no shame in front of them. All of the women are permitted to look upon her, as it is said, that all women may be taught not to do after your lewdness. What in the Bible is a private ritual that happens in the sanctuary, not a good ritual, but nevertheless a private ritual between husband, priest, and woman, becomes here profoundly public, voyeuristic, and I might even say pornographic ritual, where she is put on view before all. It becomes a spectacle. And she has made an example for free women. They're supposed to come and they're supposed to look at her nakedness. I'm going to get your comment. Now, I just again want to see, the rabbis, this is the rabbinic imagination. They're not actually probably describing what happened in the Second Temple period. Remember, this is all written after the temple's destroyed. So the ritual isn't happening. And we're not even sure whether or not the evidence is ambiguous about whether this ritual was actually performed. But nevertheless, I want you to see what they're imagining and what they're creating. This is an example for me of Torah that's not Sam HaChaim, but Sam HaMavet. There was a hand.
No, it just sounds like this is the way for a man to get a divorce, period. I mean,
divorce is actually much easier in rabbinic law than this, with a divorce document.
Well, I just say that in terms of what woman would agree to this.
What woman would agree to. She doesn't have well, in theory, she doesn't have a choice here, right? She's forced and brought up to the temple. Right, but she might need she loses her money for the ketubah. We don't really know why she might not want to say, I did it. But you're right, it would be an easier way out for her to just say, I did it. I'm out of here. Bye.
So when we were talking about the apple tree scenario, you said, I think to Alan's comment, that they weren't thinking of this as a bunch of baloney. They were thinking of something plausibly that could have happened because that was kind of the justification for the redemption of the people. And I'm curious how you see the relationship between the rabbinic imagination between these two sections of rabbinic literature.
We're going to go there in a minute. That's amazing. But I do want to say that I see these, I'll say one thing before we get more specific, which is I see them all as part of the same culture. And that also is why I think just moving into the more rabbinic mode of thinking about these is why I also think that these can be powerful models for us in thinking about our own culture in terms of both the ugliness and the beauty that any world, any society holds. Their world wasn't different than ours, but we're going to put them back in dialogue in a moment.
Bonnie.
Oh.
Katie? Or?
No, Bonnie.
Oh, Bonnie, okay.
You just wonder what a man would think about his wife, that he would do this to her.
Right.
And how, if she knew this could happen, that she would say whatever she had to say to make sure it didn't happen.
Right. Very much you have to wonder.
I think verses 5 through 7 need to be read through verse 1, right? So the rabbis have made this gesture of sort of going from a man has a jealous emotion or a jealous thought, and it triggers this process, to he warns her, and then there's a witnessed interaction, even if it's only witnessed by him, right? I think maybe the visual is still appalling, but I sort of read this not as saying this actually happened, but as saying, like, if you've got a jealous husband, be on guard. Know that if you don't toe the line, terrible things could happen.
Right. Be on guard, and also what you're pointing out is that the biblical version, it's much easier to start it. Just the emotion of jealousy is enough. Here, it's contextualized actually in a wider legal framework, which can make it more difficult to actually start the ritual because there has to be the warning. One more. Oh, there are two more. 1, 2. There'll be more chance to take comments.
That's okay.
Go.
Okay. So I was also thinking about who is responsible for a man's emotions.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So that was one thought that came up for me. And then the other was that as I was listening to you read this, I just thought of all of the wrongful conviction cases I've read. Mm-hmm. And speaking of righteousness, this commitment to, no, I am innocent. Mm-hmm. You can torture me in all these different ways, and I'm going to continue to say this. Mm-hmm. I am innocent.
Right.
And the fact that in so many of those cases, the confessions are coerced, and there were, quote, witnesses.
Very
and so
much
it just
so.
feels so close to home.
It's very, very close to home. It's very, very close to home.
I suspect you're probably heading this way, but the juxtaposition of the first section that we read with the rest of these, my question is whether or not the rabbis in the first section are trying to say, oh no, we're not, we're not misogynists. We're, we recognize, or it's thanks to the women that we've gotten this, as opposed to like not recognizing the fact that it's hypocrisy.
Amazing. So we're going to juxtapose in one moment. We're going to juxtapose in one moment that it could be the rabbis of the very first passage we read, the righteous women speaking back to this. I'm going to read one more from the Mishnah. Oh, yes.
It's more of a comment. When reading this, I think, okay, well, what happened with the other man who was supposedly part of this?
Great. That's also there in the Mishnah of what happens to the other man. And yes, we could do a whole other thing on that. Let me just do 7. In the measure that a person measures, so it is measured out to him. So this is the idea of midah keneged midah. Basically, you're punished in a measure that's appropriate, that fits the misdeed you do. She adorned her body in order to transgress. God has disgraced her. She exposed her body in order to transgress. God has exposed her. She began the transgression with the thigh and afterwards with the belly. Therefore will the thigh be smitten first and afterwards the belly, and the rest of her body shall not escape. Okay, so that's where we're going to pause in the Mishnah. I want us to go back to the first text now, just for a moment, and put the first text in conversation with the second. Remember, this first text is from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sotah. What we read is from the Mishnah, Tractate Sotah. So it's slightly earlier. This is part of the section of the Talmud that is commentary on these Mishnayot that we just read. So where does the Sotah ritual, where does the woman actually, the Sotah, where does she commit her so-called crime, her imagined crime? She goes and hides herself in secret with this man. What did these women do? These women leave their home, and these women go to the fields and have sexual intercourse that is actually imagined as a righteous act. Not only that, but these women actually do acts of caregiving here. So they are feeding, washing, they're getting water, they're getting fish. God is actually acting as their partner here. And God also becomes the midwife. So we have a number of mirrors going on here. Instead of, in the Sotah ritual, you can conceptualize the woman as rebelling against her husband. Here we have the women rebelling against Pharaoh. In the Sotah ritual, you can also imagine these women, we have acts of care reversed. Her clothes are stripped, right? Her clothes are ripped. She's exposed. Here, these women do these acts of intimate bodily care for their husbands. They wash them and they clean them. Here, God shows care rather than declaring, she transgressed, therefore I'm going to visit punishment on her, to mirror the way in which she transgressed. And not only that, here, these women give birth and God acts as the midwife. So part of the way in which I see what's happening in this midrashic text is that it's acting as a mirror to the Sotah ritual that is presented in the Mishnah. Now, the rabbis being the rabbis, they can't come out and say, and they never do actually, in anything that they find ethically troubling, they never come out and they say, this is awful, I don't like it. What they do is they push back in more subtle ways. They can push back by making statements and saying, this never happened and never will happen. Why do we know, for example, about the rebellious son who needs to be executed? Oh, so that we can interpret it and receive a reward. So they have different modes of pushing back against things that they consider to be unethical. This is a more subtle mode of pushing back against things that they consider unethical. But part of the way in which I look at the composition of the Talmud is that it's not accidental. They could have put this story, all of the narratives about the going out from Egypt somewhere else, but they don't. They put it here. And one of the other, you don't see it so strongly in what I've done here, but the book of Ezekiel, which has these images of a wife who's punished for adultery, undergirds the Sotah ritual. Here, they use the book of Ezekiel to actually talk about God's care and God's taking care of the newborn babies. So we have a lot of mirroring that's going on here. I want to turn to the last text, which is from a midrash called the Tanhuma. The Tanhuma is later than the Talmud. Different parts of it date to different times. We can really go almost from the 5th or 6th century up to much later. This is from Midrash Tanhuma, a chapter called Pekudei, and it's yet another telling. It's a retelling of the same Midrash that we read first about these righteous women. So here it comes in about the tabernacle, the desert tabernacle at the end of the book of Exodus. You find that at the time when Israel was under ruthless labor in Egypt, Pharaoh decreed that they, the men, were forbidden to sleep in their homes so that they would not have sexual intercourse. Said Rabbi Shimon, the son of Chalafta, what did the daughters of Israel do? They went down to draw water from the Nile, and the Holy Blessed One would summon small fish to their jugs. They would sell some, cook some, and with the money buy wine and go down to the field and feed their husbands there, as it says, with all sorts of tasks in the field. When they had eaten and drunk, they took the mirrors and looked in them with their husbands. She said, I am more beautiful than you. He said, I am more beautiful than you. Through this, they accustomed themselves to desire, and they were fruitful and multiplied. The Holy Blessed One remembered them immediately, made the women pregnant. Our sages say some women gave birth to 2 at once. Some say 6 from one belly, and some say 12 from one belly. Others say 600,000. Try that. By the merit of these mirrors, which the women showed to their husbands, and so accustomed them to desire from the midst of the oppression, they raised all of the hosts that left Egypt. As it is said, all the hosts of the Lord departed from the land of Egypt. And it says, the Lord freed Israel from the land of Egypt by hosts. When the Holy Blessed One said to Moses to make the tabernacle, the desert tabernacle, all of Israel stood and offered freely. Those that brought gold or copper or lapis lazuli or stones for the setting, they brought everything zealously. Said the women, what do we have to bring as a freewill offering to the tabernacle? They stood and brought the mirrors and took them to Moshe. When Moshe saw the mirrors, he got angry at them. He said to Israel, take staffs and break the thighs of these ones, the mirrors, for what are they necessary? Said the Holy Blessed One to Moshe, Moshe, these you scorn? These mirrors, they raised all of these hosts that left Egypt. Take them and make from them the copper sink and its stand for the priests, from which the priests will sanctify themselves. It's a pretty great text here. You can see it reads a little more like a story than our earlier one. I want to say a few things about it to just as a way of conclusion. Number one, I said that our story about the righteous women for whose sake Israel was redeemed from Egypt is a mirroring of the Sotah ritual. Here, the mirrors become explicitly part of the story. When they retell it, there are mirrors in it. The biblical scholar, the wonderful scholar Aviva Zornberg, teaches about these mirrors. She points out that it's not actually normal when you're seducing someone to say, I am more beautiful than you. No, I'm more beautiful than you. This is not normally what we actually do. But what she wants to actually point out is that when you are a slave, you are degraded and often feel yourself as not worthy of desire. So what do these women do in order to seduce their husbands? They feed them and they clean them and they make them look in a mirror and say, I am beautiful. I am worthy of desire. That's what these women do. Perhaps that is their act of righteousness. But I want to add something else onto that as well. I read these women as righteous because they are also subversive. They are not simply rebelling against Pharaoh, though they are doing that as well. What I read is that the location of this story in Tractate Sotah of the Babylonian Talmud enables these women to subvert the Sotah ritual itself. It's not a matter of a dichotomy between licit and illicit sexuality. They actually flow together. And the women in this sugya come forth and say, no, 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 to the Mishnah. That's not actually how it was. We actually acted with acts of radical care in the midst of deep oppression. For me, that is the miracle for which Israel was redeemed from Egypt, was that these women actually had the courage to do these everyday acts of feeding, cleaning, taking mirrors, and arousing desire in the midst of a world in which they actually weren't supposed to be doing and feeling any of that. They took the ordinary acts of care and turned them into acts of redemption. So for me, I can look at the Sotah ritual and say, you know what? It's not good. It's not the holiness of our texts. But the Talmud itself speaks back, and it speaks back through these women with their mirrors. On my Seder plate, I got this custom, I want to name the women, from Judith Cates and Gail Tversky-Reamer. I put a mirror on my Seder plate. And I put a mirror, not an orange, I put a mirror on my Seder plate for these women and this narrative of subversion, rebellion, and freedom. And I put a mirror on my Seder plate to remind myself to look and to listen and to notice that liberation comes ultimately from us having the courage to do these small acts of care for others. Shabbat shalom, and thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks once again to Dr. Kanarek. We have one more opportunity to learn with Jane. That will be this evening at 7 p.m. So please join us then for some wine and some cheese and fish. No, not fish. But I also just want to take a moment to say thank you to our Lifelong Learning Committee and to Melissa and Barry and Sharon, who is the heir apparent in terms of her leadership of the committee, did a beautiful job introducing Dr. Kanarek today. But we have a really wonderful committee of volunteers who work together and think about learning opportunities at the shul, including who we might select each year as a scholar in residence. And I can say that while I've known Jane for many years, and as Rav Tyler said earlier, he's had the pleasure and the privilege of being her student. I wasn't the one who suggested bringing Jane. I was incredibly supportive when the suggestion was made, but it's amazing that we have such a wonderful group of people collaborating that we can brainstorm together of terrific assets and resources to bring to our community. So kol hakavod to Rabbi Kanarek, kol hakavod to our committee. Shabbat shalom. Get some rest. We'll see you at 7 o'clock.